And oh my gosh, resistant stock. That is why I really love this one. Now, it is more specific to beekeeping, but resistant stock, host resistance. Now we're starting to get into the gold or the holy grail, I think, of IPM, the foundation. All right, can you see that okay?
Yep, rock and roll. We're full screen.
Excellent. All right, so I'm an entomologist, trained entomologist, and so I've had IPM drilled into my head because that's what entomologists do is all types of IPM, whether it's field crops predominantly, whether it's homes, sensitive areas like dwellings, nursing homes, where there's contact with people. And so I've had a broad exposure to IPM, but I was a beekeeper before I became an entomologist. And I was familiar with IPM, but it was one dimensional. And after I studied this, it became three dimensional. And it was kind of eye opening as well. And it really affirmed some stuff that I knew to be true that I was already working on. So it worked out all right. Okay. Some of you may be asking, what the heck is IPM? Some of you have probably heard about it. It's integrated pest management. So we changed the title a little bit for impactful pest management because this is my take on it. And we're going to kind of review some commonly held knowledge and then I'll put my spin on it. So this was a definition that I took off the USDA website. It's IPM, or integrated pest management, is a science-based decision-making process that combines tools and strategies to identify and manage pests. So I mentioned earlier, IPM is just a system and it can be applied to row crop, pest management and dwellings. It's just IPM has a wide umbrella, and we use IPM approach to managing mites and honeybees. So it's really data-based decision making, which I think is what gives IPM an edge because, a lot of people, which we kind of get caught in this, which I'll touch on how we get caught out of that or how we get out of it, but getting on the chemical treadmill is what a lot of people refer to it as. So, you know, instead of trying to alcohol wash 2,000 colonies and figure out where the problems are, we'll just do samples to kind of give us an idea of what the load is and if we need to act. That's the main thing, is acting whenever you need to, and if you don't, avoiding it because it's costly and you've got chemical exposure. It's just a waste of time if you don't need it. So the goal of IPM is to treat only when you need it and to try other approaches as well, if you can, which with bees is somewhat limited. So how does IPM apply to bees? This is, I snapped several IPM pyramids. So entomologists and other people will make a pyramid of what they think is important, like a hierarchy somewhat. And some of these apply well and some of them don't as well. So like looking at this one, the bottom of it here is prevention. If you look at bees, I mean, how do we prevent Varroa mites? Like it's completely impossible. But they just seem like they appear out of thin air sometimes. But you've got feral colonies around. We can't manage those, and so prevention's not really applicable. Cultural or sanitation. This more so applies to row crop. Like if you've got trash or like refuse left over from, like if you take corn and you've got stalks and stuff everywhere, sometimes those stalks can house pests. And so, cultural or sanitation, a lot of times is just cleaning up the area to where you're not, inviting or giving the pests a spot to reside. That doesn't necessarily apply either to bees, not really well. Physical or mechanical. You can do drone removal to remove mites. Some people advocate screen bottom boards as getting rid of some mites too, but biological, that would be, in my eyes, something like a fungus that we could introduce or a natural predator that would eat Varroa mite and actually control them. And we don't really have a lot of great options with that either. So unfortunately, we end up at the top of the pyramid here. If drone removal and other things didn't work, to where we end up right back on the chemical treadmill, and we're trying to deal with them, whether it be organic acids or something a little more, I guess you would just look at it chemically based, like amitraz, or old school. People used to use fluvalinate or coumaphos that were rather harsh chemicals. So again, with IPM, the main thing here is just decision or evidence-based decision making. So the main thing we have to go to is alcohol washes to figure out what our load is and is it worth dealing with. Typically in IPM, if you're setting a threshold, so we'll quantify it, but if you don't have you have to have a cutoff, like when do we actually act? Some row crop and some of those IPM methods will go to great lengths to quantify the cost of the damage at certain levels. So they have it down to the pennies as to when they need to act. Beekeeping is a little bit different, and it depends on something I'm going to get into here in a little bit. I got this pyramid off of this website here, snatched it off the internet. Here's another one. Link on the right is where I got it. So they've got it a little bit more simplified. Cultural, mechanical, and again, chemicals are your last resort. That's always the tip top. But I liked off to the side here, they've got prevention or intervention. Basically, they would try to do that first. And then also, the higher up the pyramid you go, as you work through these options, the toxicity gets higher. So there's always a trade-off. And I thought it was quite interesting. It says cultural here on the right. It says reduce reproduction. I'm assuming this is probably row crop or something, but that really ties into our breeding operation because we breed or select for suppressed mite reproduction. So we're reducing reproduction. This one, you work your way up, kill by physical means. I mean, you can smash hive beetles with your hive tool. That's very gratifying. But Varroa mite, that's a little bit more difficult. Then you work your way up, non-synthetic compounds. So I'm assuming that would be like an organic acid or something that's a little bit softer. And then you get into synthetic compounds that, again, the toxicity starts going up. So there are no solutions, only trade-offs. This one was from the Lopez Uribe lab, where Robyn and Underwood and them are at. And this one I feel like is more focused on bees. You can see this column over to the right, specific to beekeeping. So they've got cultural, physical, mechanical, biological, chemical. And you look off to the right, good sanitation, habitat, modification, and oh my gosh, resistant stock. That is why I really love this one. Now, it is more specific to beekeeping, but resistant stock, host resistance. Now we're starting to get into the gold or the holy grail, I think, of IPM, the foundation, resistant stock. And they put it at the exact right spot down at the bottom. It's the foundation. So comb culling, resistant bee stock, small size comb. I don't have any experience with that. I don't know how good it works. Some people may know more than I. or break in the brood cycle. I think that's naturally swarming, and you can make a brood break too. But I love it. They absolutely nailed it here. Resistant bee stock. That is where it's at. And I feel like if you do not have resistant stock, your bees have no way to deal with mites. They have no host resistance. So really, if you don't have to treat and you do samples and your mite levels are low, you probably just got lucky, or you don't have a lot of pressure in your area, which is also luck. It's not because your bees were doing anything about it necessarily, assuming you don't have host resistance. But we can select for this. So physical, mechanical, again, trap crops, that's more row crop type of approach to where they'll put something that's susceptible, or they'll, very attractive, and the pests will come in and they'll just treat that, or it just pulls the pest away to something they want a little bit better, and you can protect what it is that you're trying to grow. Not quite as applicable to beekeeping, but again, on the second column, drone brood removal, screen bottom boards, powdered sugar, hive beetle traps, mite zapper, like that's a physical or mechanical approach to mitigating mites. So biological, this is always really cool. It's like predators, parasites, like natural enemies, they would call it a lot in entomology. So if you got a pest that's destroying a food crop and they have a natural enemy, like if you have a problem with aphids and then you bring in ladybugs that eat up all the aphids, that's a really cool biological approach. A little bit more difficult, but it can be done. Nematodes, for hive beetle reproduction, because the little larvae will get down into the dirt and then these nematodes attack the larvae. So that's, again, I like that, like the previous one we looked at, as you're working your way up this pyramid, your toxicity and your potential for that toxicity grows. So with biological, there's no issue. You're not treating with any chemicals. Now you start to get into, formic acid, oxalic acid, so organic acids, menthol, thymol, Nosovit. That does help mitigate some of this stuff, mites in particular, but I know menthol and oils could have an effect on some other diseases potentially too. And you get to the top of the pyramid and you're at peak potential for toxicity. Pyrethroids, organophosphates, like old check mite we used to use, that's an organophosphate pesticide. It's kind of harsh. Antibiotics, then, specific to beekeeping, which Coumaphos here is an organophosphate, but fluvalinate, Coumaphos amitraz, and you get into your antibiotics, fumagillin for nosema. But again, whenever you get to that top level, you're starting to pull pins and throw grenades in. So the trade-off of chemical contamination or chemical contamination to your cell rises, so that the risk goes up. Here's another one I snaked off the internet. I don't think it's as good as the Marguerite, the Uribe bee lab. But if you look at the center here, host plant resistant. So this is for row crop specifically, but they got that right. This is the center of the foundation, the holy grail. If you're whatever you're growing, whether it's bees or wheat or corn, if the corn doesn't have some kind of natural resistance mechanism for corn earworms or whatever its pest it is, you just end up treating. You don't have an option. You can't get off that chemical treadmill. And I think if you don't have host resistance, there's no way you can, unfortunately. What is host resistance? I Googled host resistance, and like all the definitions I found, like I felt like they were stupid. So I just kept thinking of it myself, and this is kind of what I came up with. Physical traits or behaviors that protect an organism against pests and pathogens. So I'm looking at bees specifically. This is one of my breeder queens in this picture here. You can see her. And if you'll notice off to the left of her and up a little bit, there's a pupa. These bees smell that something's wrong in that brood, either Varroa parasitization or a sick brood. Sometimes I think they just know something's wrong and they're sick and they throw it outside. So, they're doing the hygiene and they're doing the cleaning to get these infested or sick pupa out of the way to where it doesn't continue the cycle in your brood nest. So they're taking control of this. It's not me having to clean up something or cold drone brood or whatever. This is the bees actually doing this themselves. And so without this, I just don't think you have a solid IPM program. But of course, breeding for host resistance, especially the old-fashioned way, is the hardest path. It's the most difficult, and people want an easy button. So, but anything that I've found in life that was worth having and was really good did not come easy. So what would you expect? So if you're looking at bees specifically regarding host resistance, what is it? Well, we already know that bees have host resistance traits like aloe grooming. If you've ever heard of Purdue mite biters, they are an aloe grooming line. So I don't know if they dance or somehow they notify a nest mate that they have a mite on them, and the nest mate bites it or grooms it off of them. So very cool way to combat mites. So that's aloe grooming. Auto grooming is if the bee grooms the mite off itself. It's not a nest mate. So similar, still grooming, but instead of a nest mate, you're getting a little bugger off yourself. So hygiene, like general hygiene, that would be like freeze killed brood test. Then you get into suppressed mite reproduction. They're not letting Varroa mites reproduce. And a lot of people would say this is the same thing. Suppressed mite reproduction is the old term for Varroa sensitive hygiene, but I still think those mechanisms are so complex. And I've seen some data because I've tested suppressed mite reproduction for so long. We trialed UBeeO as well, which is kind of the hygienic function of it. And there seems to be some overlap, but I still think suppressed mite reproduction and the hygienic element can be in the same bee. And I think that also they could be two separate measurable phenomena. But that's theory. I need more data to support that claim. Get a look at this guy. This is your IPM program with no host resistance. That's how your IPM program appears. Now, if you start breeding for aloe grooming, auto grooming, or VSH, you're starting to really put host resistant traits in your population. Boom. There's your IPM program, baby. For the ladies, I'll just hover over that for a little bit longer. So equate this with host resistance. This is what you need in your IPM programs. Measurable resistance traits. Before, I think it was late 19 or early 2020, we couldn't measure anything. Best we had was alcohol washes. So it would give you an idea of what the load was in your colonies. But I'm really skeptical based off of testing I've done that you're seeing in this picture right here of SMR testing. I'm really critical of alcohol wash as a selection tool. Like if you're trying to measure host resistance, I think it's loose based off of what I've seen with SMR testing. So what I mean by this is whenever we're SMR testing, we're measuring the bee's ability to suppress mite reproduction, whether it's a brood function or a hygiene function or both, doesn't matter really. We're quantifying the ability of the bees to suppress mite reproduction. And a lot of these samples, I think Jamie was over here to the left, my wife, she came across a sample and we found these samples multiple times. Out of 100 pupa, there's upwards of five non-reproductive mites in the 100 pupa. 0 reproducing mites. So that's a 100% SMR or VSH colony. They get mites, they just don't let them reproduce. If they're reproducing, they find them and they throw them out. So if you think about that, approximately how many bees are in an alcohol wash? 300. We found 5 mites. Now they were non-reproductive, but there's mites in there. We found 5 in a 100 sample. So if you, in theory, do an alcohol wash on these young nurse bees that are just coming out of that brood that we're measuring, that's a 15 wash. That would be a cull. I guarantee you, Randy Oliver would cull that one. So you might be selecting for something I'm missing with an alcohol wash. I'm not saying it's worthless or you shouldn't do that. But for BSH or SMR specific, an alcohol wash is not going to capture that. It's too loose of a measure. They're at odds at times. So, alcohol washes are good for quantifying your mite load to see if you need to treat, but I don't think they're the best resistance measurement. I think this one is really, but it's got difficulty associated with it. So the SMR or the VSH assay, we're measuring, again, the bee's ability to suppress mite reproduction. That historically has been classed as Varroa sensitive hygiene. But like I said, we had mites in our brood. If you don't have mites in your brood because you just treated or cleaned them up or treated them before they started raising brood and they haven't got a load yet, you're going to get a false positive. So this is the problem. The main problem, I think, with a Harbo assay for the general public is that your IPM program of managing your mites when they hit threshold and needing mites to collect data at the right times that you can reproduce it, actually use that data and raise queen, are at odds. That's my major complaint about the Harbo assay. Because if you're treating, people will ask me, well, if I hit them with oxalic, how long do I need to wait before I have mites? And I'm like, dude, I have no idea. I don't know. It depends on where you're at. Do you have high mite pressure? You may not have to wait that long. You may have to wait till September. I don't know. So that gets too crazy. I don't like when there's a larger gap available for false positives. It just seems like it's opening people up for failure or results that aren't real. That's just as bad. So UBeeO, I know there's a lot of pushback on UBeeO. People not sure what it is. It's new. How does it work? Does it work consistently? It's still new. We'll find out. Here's what I'll say about UBeeO. Before I tested UBeeO, I claimed or speculated that there would be a high overlap between SMR and VSH and UBeeO. Why did I say that? Well, VSH is a hygienic mechanism for Varroa sensitive hygiene. I knew that they were smelling the brood, finding if something's wrong or if we have an infestation, removing the sick brood. The main reason I claimed that there was going to be overlap between the two is I've had viral load data done on my untreated VSH stock. Deformed wing virus. We didn't do a full virus panel. This was just deformed wing virus A, B, and C. Untreated bees that had been untreated for years. No, they had, I got the results back. Deformed wing virus A, below quantifiable levels. It's there, but it's so low, we can't get a good measurement on it. Same with deformed wing virus B, below quantifiable levels. Deformed wing virus C, none. Like, oh, that's quite interesting. Well, I think they're just locating sick pupa and throwing it out. Well, in comes UBeeO. What's UBeeO stand for? Unhealthy brood odor. So it's basically synthetic stress pheromones. They spray them on the brood and they see if the bees open it up to see if there's a problem. And That's how they're measuring. It's a hygiene response. So Varroa sensitive hygiene and UBeeO, which is a hygiene response. On the UBeeO data, Karia said that the deform wing virus levels on these high UBeeO colonies is crazy low. Oh my gosh. Low viral, low deform wing virus, low deform wing virus, hygiene, hygiene. How could there ever be overlap? You know what I'm saying? So this is where my mind was going ahead of time. In our population, according to Caro, had unprecedented results. I know some people are skeptical over it, but and I'm open. I want to see more data, and we need to test it and see where we go with it. But that this technology or this approach is so awesome that I didn't see it coming. I'll be real honest with you. It's such a cool approach. It is so next level that, you know, even if it needs tweaks, which, you know, oftentimes the first version needs a little tweak, even if it needs a little adjustment, I think that the approach that they've taken is opened a door that is going to yield so much cool stuff and take us to the next level in selecting for host resistance. So I'm psyched over it. But we had unprecedented results. I know some people, I was speaking with Dr. Pernal here in Manitoba this morning. They didn't have high scores. And so, you know, which elicits skepticism. But the way I look at it is that's exactly what I expected. I've been hoarding VSH for 13 years, something like that, at least 12 years. I knew there was overlap between the two, and I scored high. A lot of these other entities or individuals, unless you have hoarded specific hygienic host resistance traits, why would you have a high score? So, you know, I want to know more too, and I want to test and see. And I know Kara and company and Phoebe and them want to do the same. But I think that I think the potential for this is game changing. So that's my take on UBeeO, and we'll be doing a ton of testing this year as well. But an advantage of UBeeO compared to Harbo is it doesn't fight your IPM program. So that's why I really hope it's everything I think it is, because then you don't have to interrupt your IPM program to try to get good data to where you can breed. So breeding and managing your mites are at odds. With UBeeO, it doesn't matter. You don't have to have a mite load to get a measurable response. And before Harbo, which I love, that's what I've been doing for a while. John Harbo, I wouldn't be where I'm at now if those guys hadn't discovered all this stuff, the USDA lab. So I think the top two options are UBeeO and your SMR VSH assay. The VSH assay, if you don't mind letting your bees get a mite load, all you need is a parafine forceps. You don't even have to have a grafting stand like we have here. You can use one of those LED halos, or you can just use your eyesight, like myself here, and a headlamp. So you don't have to invest a lot. UBeeO is a little bit more expensive, but the cost is coming down as they produce larger batches. So freeze killed brood. Historically, that's what we could measure beforehand. It was like, but it's not new technology. I mean, Rothenbuehler and Park, I think, were using this way back in the day. Rothenbuehler was using cyano gas, whatever that is, instead of liquid nitrogen. So it does select for hygiene, but it's different than like a UBeeO or a VSH hygiene. You shouldn't see chalk brood and things of that nature, you know, that you get resistance towards brood diseases, but they said it doesn't correlate well with actual mite specific resistance the way VSH, Varroa sensitive hygiene, is mite specific, and UBeeO seems to be mite specific too. So here's an option. We talked about allo grooming earlier, or auto grooming. If you're using drop boards, you could measure that. That's relatively new, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, but you could measure that too. You're looking for missing legs and like dents in their exoskeleton. But I've also read another thing somewhat recently that was saying a lot of mites are born with a dent or somehow get a dent in their exoskeleton, and it wasn't because a bee bit it. So I don't know enough about that to say this or that. It would be cool to experiment with, but I think for now, because Varroa is a big problem in the brood reproducing, I think VSH and UBeeO are going to be your probably most straightforward. Not to mention the viral load reduction is probably as important with the top two as actual suppressing mite reproduction. So it's multifaceted. That's what makes it so amazing. Alcohol washes, again, not good for measuring VSH, I don't think. Not from the data that I've seen from years of testing. They kind of go, you're going to miss, if you're just using alcohol wash, you're going to miss some 100% VSH bees. So I don't think it's accurate for measuring that, but it might be measuring something that I'm missing by just focusing on suppressed mite reproduction. So I think it has value, but I don't think it's good for selecting VSH. It's good for seeing what your mite load is and if you're over threshold and if you need to treat or not. That's what an alcohol wash is for. So how do we Harbo test? Some of you may be asking this. You want to invite friends. Because if it's just you, you're not going to get a lot done unless you just have endless spare time. Tell the friends it's fun. This is a complete lie, but tell them it's fun and you'll have more volunteers. Obviously, I'm kidding here. We do have fun. Everybody's smiling here. So we have fun, but it is tedious work. So you got to have friends that love you. Collect frames of the appropriate age pupa. That's past the purple-eyed stage. Most of you know what purple-eyed pupa look like. The reason why you don't want to grab the purple-eyed ones are because that's the age that the bees are addressing the mite reproduction. They're opening them up when they're purple-eyed and throwing them outside. If you go around and look at my colonies that the mite load's rising, you'll see drone pupa. My bees work drones too, and worker pupa pitched outside. Oftentimes more drones than workers, which kind of goes against what some people have said that VSHBs only work worker brood. I don't think that's the case, but it could be unique to certain populations like mine. So collect frames of appropriate age larvae. You're going to want to number them because if you test them and you don't know who you tested, it's worthless and you wasted a bunch of time and your friends won't come back. So number the frames so that you can capture this data. And basically for a simplified Harbo assay, if you've got a mite load, usually 100 pupa is a minimum sample size most of the time, especially in September. If your mite loads are rising, that you can get a definitive VSH score with 100. And then you have somebody keep score. What's the colony number? 55, and then as you go, found a reproductive, we tally them. Or non-reproductive, would tally how many non-reproductives, and then you're going to score it afterwards. And if you're wanting to use the Harbo assay, John emailed me the other day and he updated the sheet. I think there was a minor inconsistency. There was 2 columns that you would use to score, and in certain instances, it was a little bit confusing. It could go one of 2 ways, and I think he fixed that. So if you Google Harbo Bee Company and click on VSH and click on measure VSH, it will take you to the new and improved how-to sheet and scoring guide. So you can do that at home. It is tedious, don't get me wrong. I mean, to capture tons of data, you probably want friends or you're going to want to devote a lot of time to it. Or if that's way more than you want to do, you're not into bee breeding, support somebody who's doing the work and doing the breeding, buy queens from them. So if we have host resistance, actual host resistance, what are some potential impacts? Well, overall, they're going to have lower mite loads. I think that's why some people started using alcohol wash. Like if I just catch the low loads, I'm probably getting some good stuff. And I think that's right, but I just think it's not quite as accurate. So you should see a reduction in mite loads overall. I mean, if you think about it, even that 15 wash I was talking about that had 5 non-reproductives, they have a lot of mites coming in from robbing or whatever, but they're not letting it reproduce. Well, if you tested it later, the mite loads are going to be lower. But with that alcohol wash, when you took that, it was a snapshot of a high load coming in, not the snapshot of the bee's ability to deal with it. That's the difference. So overall, you should see fewer mites. You absolutely should see a reduction of viral issues from Varroa. Whenever I first started using VSH, I would see deformed wing virus. Like you would look at a frame of bees here and you would see a bunch of them and their wings look like two little pieces of yarn. They could never fly. They were just a drag on the colony. So I would replace that queen with a VSH queen. If they didn't perish, some of them did, some of them was too late when I tried to requeen them. But the ones that made it, I would come back in a couple months. I would go in there and 0 bees had deformed wing virus. That's how I figured out. I think there's an overlap between UBeeO and VSH because they're somehow controlling viral loads. And I tell people, if you go through my bees, you go through my apiaries, if you find one bee with deformed wing virus, I'll give you $100 bill. And that's kind of a spinoff of John Keefus's mite challenge where he was paying people to find mites in his bees, but he wasn't paying as much. I was up in the ante and being bold. So you should see a reduction of viral issues. If you're using VSH, maybe not allogrooming, I don't know. I don't have enough experience with it, but UBeeO bees show that they should have reduced viral loads, and VSH bees absolutely do. I've seen it with my own 2 eyes. Reduction of brood diseases. I used to see chalk brood before I was using VSH. I used to see deformed wing virus. I had the works. I had poor survival, and I was using standard IPM, so I was just treating on a schedule. I wasn't even mite checking. I just, like most beekeepers, it's like, I'm just going to treat them, you know. And then I got away from that. I kind of went 180 actually once I got VSH stock, good VSH stock. So you should see a reduction of brood diseases, and you should see increased survival. These bees are not immortal. They're not magic. If you have a high VSH colony, they can die. They can starve to death. They can get sprayed with pesticide. They could have beekeeper boo-boo rolled the queens and we didn't requeen. They could swarm and fail to requeen. Any number of things can go wrong. VSH bees can die too. But overall, statistically, they have a better chance of survival. And if they can control mites on their own and they can control the viruses, of course they have a higher chance of survival. Should be obvious. Increased revenue. I mean, if you're running stock that has measurable host resistance, it's not that you don't treat. A lot of guys, you know, that run some of my stock commercially, they still treat, but one in particular said he doesn't have to treat as much. He has more colonies that make an 8-frame average for almonds. He makes more honey. Is it because the bees are more productive or less dead? Who cares? If you're making more honey and you're making more on your pollination contracts and you don't have to treat as much, proofs in the bottom line. And that's not peer-reviewed data, that's redneck data, but that's gold in my opinion. Reduction of chemical intervention. That's the whole point of IPM here. And that's why I'm saying if you don't have host resistance, your IPM program looks a little weak. Because there's no way to reduce chemical intervention unless you got lucky. You might as well just have a treatment schedule. And that's what most beekeepers do, because most beekeepers don't run stock that has high measurable levels of host resistance. So I know I've said host resistance more than you want to hear today, but I truly believe in it. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's not a complete silver bullet, but it is a big hammer in the toolbox. And I think the industry should adopt it more. All right. What questions have you?
Thanks, Cory. Appreciate your time this morning. As a panelist, you should be able to access the Q&A panel. Since we're running to time, if you have time to hang out for a little bit and grab some of those questions and you can answer them online.
Absolutely. I'll probably stop screen sharing so I can scan the questions and pick and choose if that's all right.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Just a quick overview here in case you want to contact me or stalk me or see what I do. StevensBeeCo.com is my website. StevensBeeCo on Facebook, Instagram. YouTube, we've got some interesting conversations because I'm obsessed with host resistance and breeding. So I've got a few guests on there that are cool conversations. I'll do a lot more because as of this coming Friday, James mentioned I'm unemployed. So I'll have more time to make YouTube content and educational content. If you want to email me, stevensbeeco@gmail. I opened up my Patreon, which is an app or a platform that if you want to support someone, you think they're doing cool things, you want to send them $20 a month, hop on there. I'll be putting videos on that you won't see on YouTube. We'll probably do some live Harbo testing, UBeeO testing, that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit more interactive. That may be of interest to some people. So let me stop screen sharing here.
Thanks, Cory. Appreciate it. It was a great presentation. We appreciate you very much. And we're glad that you didn't slip off too far into the Baileys.
No, I didn't. I just I feel really bad about that I wasn't on here. I was supposed to be on. I thought 10:30. I'm good.
Oh no, we'll rub it in later. Don't worry.
Oh, I trust you will.
All right, thank you so much, sir.
All right, anonymous attendee. Cory, do you plan on teaching artificial insemination in the future? Possibly. I don't have immediate plans. I have a new bee shop or bee lab. Lab sounds way cooler. We'll go with lab. And I am designing it to be half lab, half extraction facility. My plans are to set that up for classes. It's not there yet. I'm not ready. So in the future I will, but I don't know when that'll be. Right now, Stu Kobe still takes students. If you want to learn from the best, somebody who has decades of experience and mass amounts of scientific study to back up why she does what she does, go to Sue. I know Crispin at Purdue does classes too. That's an option. So I would pick one of those. I'm partial to the Schley. I'm not familiar with the Apis engineering setup as well. I haven't messed with it, but a lot of people use it. It works. So, and I've got some stuff to test out from Apis engineering too. So